Hi everyone, I'm going to talk a little about our Lua enhancements in Storyboard 9 and about some new functions that have been added that will help simplify your app development and in some cases also provide a potential optimization, performance optimization at runtime. So I'm going to start with the set property function. If I go into our calendar component, there's a good example of setting properties in here. So we've added the set property function, which given a control object will take a render extension through the index of that render extension on the object, an argument on that render extension, and the value for that argument, and it will write the value to that argument even if the render extension has not had a variable created for that argument. So it's a way to modify the value of a static render extension property. This can be useful when you need to change a value that doesn't necessarily change very often. So for example, in the case of a theme, like if you're setting up a theme for your app or different themes, rather than having to create variables for every single themed element, which are variables that will almost never change except when the theme is occasionally set, you'll get to save on the memory overhead of creating those variables, as well as the performance cost of evaluating them every single time you need to render by simply not creating the variable and setting the property directly using this set property function. So to be clear, if you have a property that's being animated, that's part of an animation, you probably still do need to create a variable for that use case. So things that are changing constantly throughout your app, like for example with animations or data changes, it's not the intended use of this function to change those. You should instead use the variable creation and then use set data, get data, as you always have been. But in the case of those properties that aren't going to change very often, they're not tied to any animations, you can easily change the value now with this set property. All right, moving on to action trigger. If we go back to our component playground, there's a good example of triggering an action in here. So in our normal GRE library, we've added the action trigger function, which lets you trigger an action directly from Lua without having to create an event and then bind an event to an action in the model and then send an event into the queue. So it lets you kind of bypass the event queue and bypass a little of that overhead in the app design of creating an action and binding an event to it. And you can just directly in Lua trigger the action at your discretion. So given the name of the action and then a table with the action argument and their values. And to simplify this a little bit, we've provided the GRE const table, which contains a lot of the argument definitions for different actions. So you can see in this case we're using the screen actions. So this table, this screen path action table, contains all the values or all the argument values that you need for a screen path. So this way you can make sure that you're setting all the arguments that you need and to the correct values. We also have add data listener. So in our drop-down component, let's find that. our drop-down component uses the add data listener function. So add data listener will let you tie a Lua callback that you define yourself to a variable, and this callback will be invoked every time the variable changes. So this is just simplifying something that was already possible through some model design overhead in event creation, through creating an event and triggering a Lua callback through there. But we've just added this function to simplify creating these data listeners and easily letting you define the function that you want to listen to this piece of data and have it do whatever it needs to whenever it changes. So yeah, just useful for simplifying your app design a little bit. And then we've also made a few more improvements to our GUI DOM. So our GUI DOM control objects now have a getChild and a getParent function. So getChild, again, it's a shorthand given a name to avoid having to use the getChildren object and then loop through it yourself to find the actual child that you want to use. So just a useful shorthand. You can use getChild as long as you know the name of the child that you're looking for. And we also have getParent, which you can use to kind of work your way back up the chain and get the direct parent of this control, or the direct control parent of this control. And yeah, so those are a few of the new Lua tools that we've added that will hopefully help you simplify your app design and also hopefully provide you some optimizations when you go to run.